And I'm also having some tech issues with my camera, with both my external webcam and my internal PC camera. So I'm sorry, you can't see me at the moment.
Totally understand. It's life. It's life.
Meeting's going, sir.
Excellent. Thank you so much. Well, let's go ahead and
All
call
right.
this meeting to
Thanks.
order. It is 4:07 on March 24th. Let's begin. Christine, if you can do a roll call for us.
Sure. MK Sadiq,
Here.
Ann Hobart,
Here.
Connor Kerrigan,
Here.
Nikki Smith,
Present.
Kayla McCoy, and Pam Garvey. Quorum is present. You may proceed.
Excellent. Let us get into this conversation about the interview that we're gonna take that's gonna take place next week. So far we've had, I guess, do we have three people who've agreed to be interviewed? Okay,
Could I interrupt you really quickly?
please.
Yeah, if you want to do an approval of the March 17th,
Oh, yes.
you can. Um,
Let's do that. Sorry. Yes. Can I get a motion to approve our March 17th minutes?
I move.
A second.
Second.
All right. All those in favor say aye.
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 Good deal.
yeah, motion is approved. And then your next item up was just, I was going to let the committee or the task force know that Aaron Williams is withdrawn his application. And so did, oh gosh, I apologize.
The way with Frazier?
Yeah, Dewea Frazier also withdrew her application, and she was one of the three that the committee decided to move forward on. And so just wanted to get the task force thoughts on the possibility of asking the person who came in, I guess, fourth to interview that individual if you did indeed want to interview three people. And that was Corinne Wolford Mason.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm for it. I'm for it. I'm for interviewing three individuals. I think I just want to say as a quick note, for especially for someone like Aaron Williams, I feel like I should just take a moment to acknowledge. So please allow me the privilege that, Aaron Williams is someone who worked hard to start up what would eventually become the St. Louis Poet Laureate Task Force. He assembled a group of individuals who would serve as the first task force members. I was privileged enough to be of that group. And as a body, we were able to select a very fine inaugural poet laureate in the personage of Dr. Michael Castro. I'm very proud to be a part of that and to be in that history. And so I want to acknowledge that seeing his application as a poet and his accomplishments as a resident of the city, as well as someone who cares very much so about letters and poetry, was was surprising. 'Cause I didn't know that he was going to apply, but I thought that he had a strong application. And regardless of whatever whatever back and forth he and I may have had over the years, I was able to see the value in his work, see the value in his work as a poet, as well as somebody who cares about poetry. And I wanted to at least take a moment to acknowledge his application, the strength of his application, and what he's been able to do for our city through his activity. I wanted that to be noted in this particular moment. That said, I'm it's equally excited about looking at another applicant who could be the third for our consideration. And even though I'm not always familiar with the poets who might be in the pool, I'm certainly excited about anybody who can be an advocate and an ambassador for the letters for our city and to offer their point of view and their voice in this conversation about why poetry is relevant. So that's it. I'm for it. I would love to see her added to the that person rather added to the pool. And I'm open to anything else anyone would have to say about it. If they feel as though we should restrict it to the two, or if we should in fact open it to this third person who effectively serves as an alternate, in consideration of the others dropping out of the running.
I agree with you, MK, and I think that because the scores were so close too, I think it makes sense to interview the third person.
Excellent.
Agreed. We should interview.
Agree.
Perfect.
Wonderful. I will reach out to her and see if I can get her scheduled next Monday along with the other two candidates.
Great. Well, thank you so much for that and all your hard work, Christine. One of the things that Pam raised is having some time to consider the questions that we would ask as a task force, which I think is very much so relevant. I'm not sure why Pam couldn't join us today. Maybe it was just a mix up in the scheduling, but I'm pretty sure she can refer back to this recording and kind of be filled in on where the conversation has gone, particularly as a task force. And thank you, Nikki, for just seconding that thought and then raising the possibility that we may not be in alignment. So, because it's very much so possible. So let's definitely have a conversation about where we should go or how we should conduct ourselves with the interview, especially since this will be public and we want to make sure that everybody is aware of our point of view as a body. Okay. So any initial thoughts? As a matter of fact, Nick, I don't want to pick on you and have you go first, but if you have maybe some thoughts that would set us down this particular path of an interview, that'd be great. And then we can all just chime in after that. But I wanted to allow you that initial space.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I guess for me, and apologies for missing the last conversation. I was on vacation on spring break after having not been on one since October. So sorry for missing the conversation around it. But when I think about the interview, and I'm not sure from a question standpoint. Obviously, I've been a poet, but not interviewed in a capacity of poetry. And so I wouldn't even know kind of where to start with a question. And I'll leave that for open discussion for us to have. But my initial thought is like the structurally, how has this gone or how should it go from who's leading the conversation? How are all of us involved in the interview? Because that could be intimidating to have six people looking at you. And so I'm certain it's probably virtual. But just from a structure standpoint, speaking parts, who's kind of leading and going from there, and then really I'm assuming all of us need to be in every interview.
I think it would be useful for all of us to be in the interview.
Yeah,
I'm sure that it could be intimidating, but really no more intimidating than being a public figure representing the city of St. Louis as a
for
poet laureate.
sure.
You
For
know, so
sure.
I think so if they can't handle us, and they probably should not be the poet laureate, honestly.
Point made.
that's just my thought. I don't know.
Mhm.
But we could start there with it. But I think it's funny as you point out, just as a poet having to consider what questions are relevant is important, partly because we're bringing a different dimension into it. If it's just us offering our thoughts and our words in readings or in audiences, that's one thing. But this person is representing the city of St. Louis. This is an official capacity. Part of what I think about, and I'll share this briefly, and then I want to open it up again, is I think a lot about the forms of poetry, like how familiar they are with the different kinds of poems that could be constructed. Uh, I don't want to be absolutely nerdy about it, but I do care about line breaks and stanzas. I mean, like why break a line that particular place? You know,
Mhm.
why rhyme? Why not rhyme? Right? I mean, again, and again, I know that we'll only have so much time with the poet, but I would like to know that they are well versed and thoughtful about how they compose a poem. And then why is it important for them to share poetry in particular spaces? I think that's one of the things that really came up in our scores, that you might have somebody who has an excellent background and it clearly demonstrated that they are strong as maybe as an academic, in terms of the work, but may not necessarily be as involved in the community. And that could, I think some people's scores were affected by that because of how
Mhm.
much they've read and how much they've exhibited. So I think to me, those are the things that matter most. Is like, well, like how thoughtful are you as a poet? And then how involved are you in our poetry community, as well as the
Yeah,
book community?
I definitely think as you talked through that, I was like, well, we can certainly still anchor ourselves in the rubric because I feel like each of the things that, questions that you had could fit in one of the 5 or 6 boxes on the rubric as additional questions we want to expound upon. And so that might be a good place to kind of start again, because I missed the conversation. But as we were going through the scoring, were there still open questions that we had about the candidates?
I think that's fair. I think that's fair. Let's hear from others. And Connor, what are your thoughts?
I I feel my role here is supportive in the sense that I am a published poet in the sense of I had a few poems published in college. But I think you all are much more the subject matter experts here. And so I see my role very much as being more supportive and more looking at the civic side of things and understanding, as you mentioned earlier, MK, kind of the civic responsibility that comes with being a public figure. So I'm here to help in the ways that I can, but will very much be deferring to you all.
Well said. Thank you.
Yeah, I appreciate what each of you has said. And I think that Nikki is right on that we can like anchor a lot of these in the rubric to begin with. I also I agree very much with what MK said. Like if they can't, like we're even though we have not met as a body in person, I feel like we've been pretty simpatico with the way that we've approached all of this. So I think we can create that welcoming, non-threatening as possible in an interview
Mhm.
situation space. Um, I also think that once we land on what questions we want to ask, that it might be good for each of us to take one question at least
Yeah.
to ask so that we're being very uniform across each of the interviews. I actually came up with 5 questions, and I love MK that you were dealing more with the poetry itself. And do you want me to go over those
Oh,
questions really
please do.
quickly?
Yes,
And
yes.
I don't have any ego about any of this. So
That's fine.
whatever is decided by the group. So one would be, what is your vision for your term as St. Louis Poet Laureate? How do you envision your poetry and outreach as connecting with and making an impact upon your audience? Um, how do you plan to use your platform as Poet Laureate to promote poetry and literature? How might that improve the reputation and well-being of St. Louis and its citizens? So that's one question. Those two in there are one question. And then what do you think might be the biggest challenges and opportunities to your term as Poet Laureate? And then lastly, why does your body of work make you the best candidate for Poet Laureate?
Fantastic questions. Wow. All right. Any thoughts from you, Nikki?
Yeah, I couldn't get off mute fast enough, sorry. But I was like, oh, that's great. These are great questions. I'm actually pulling up the rubric because I'm kind of going by. And for me, the reason why I'm like anchoring myself in this is because just my science brain wants to be sure that I have some defensibility on the scoring.
Yeah.
And so I'm like, okay, depending on their answer, of course, is subjective, but I would give them a 4 or 5 in that box or that box. And so as Anne was going through them, I think that's a really solid fit in a couple of areas. And then MK, when I think about, when we get to the technical skill, that's demonstration of excellence in the artistic work. Um, and so there's a couple questions obviously there. So I'm like, as you were going through, and I was kind of mentally plopping them in and scoring, practice scoring. So I thought those were great.
No, I think that's great. I also want to be mindful of the time. I believe that we will not have quorum after 4:30, so I want to make sure that we get all of our business done prior to then, so that we're not just kicking the ball around, having fun. Any other thoughts regarding? So let me just say this really quick. From the questions that Anne created to the very much so appreciated anchoring our questions in the rubric. I think between those two, we have a way forward. I think as a matter of what's the word here? Choreography, if you will. I will begin. I will begin. And I will likely ask the first question, and it will be a technical one. And hopefully that will allow the poet to just kind of be comfortable because now they're just dealing specifically with their craft, with their art form as a poet, and then we can figure out who goes, next and kind of continue on in that manner. And what'll be really useful for us, even though we won't necessarily be able to accomplish it right here and right now, I don't think, not with the time. But what we'll be able to do is perhaps via email, especially because we have a couple of members who are missing, begin to align the very questions that Anne came up with the rubric itself, and perhaps fashion questions to ensure that we have maybe a small pool of questions that we can ask. And like you, Nikki, I
Mhm.
have this scientific brain where I want to ask the same questions over and over and over again. I want to allow for, space for where we might need to do a follow-up question, or if something sparks and we ask a question, but essentially have the same set of questions for each candidate so that it remains as fair as possible in the process. Does that make sense?
Yep, because the way you ask it is the way they would answer it, right? And so we
Yep.
could say, we could ask it if we're not consistent in that manner, we could get inconsistent responses, and that then makes something that's already really subjective much more subjective than it probably should be. And so I agree with that.
Absolutely. So then that means that when we do craft the questions, let us be as s- I guess, committed to asking the question as it's laid out on the sheet of paper as possible, so that it could be as consistent as possible from candidate to candidate. Unfortunately, we're only talking about three candidates, potentially
Mhm.
three candidates. So yeah, can we agree to come up with our questions, and making sure that they align with the rubric via email so that we're prepared to offer hopefully an illuminating experience where we learn, because essentially right after we ask these questions, we will all meet again to determine who we will recommend to the Board of Aldermen as our next poet laureate. So
Yeah. Can I make a suggestion?
please.
Um, I wonder if we could create a open Google Doc, which is a templated version of the rubric, but instead of just using that as the template to plop our questions in, or maybe make comments on that, and just so that it's a little organized when we say how how we're thinking about it. So, for instance, box one is committed to bringing poetry to a wide range. Okay, what question, instead of score and comments column, be a questions column, like what questions will we ask to get to that, and then so forth. I think that may help with organization of all of our thoughts.
I agree. The only challenge is that Pam doesn't really rock with Google
Uh,
Doc.
what did we use, Christine? What did you use?
Just Word.
Oh,
So I
okay.
think, yeah, I think if the task force is amenable, I'm happy to create a Google Doc for a handful of you to use. I see Pam's on now, so she'll be able to share her thoughts. I can just make sure to the extent possible that I'm paying attention to both the Word document with suggestions and the Google Doc so that the five of you know what Pam is thinking and she also knows what you're thinking.
Yes. It sounds good. And you know, I guess it's a matter of I guess cadence and order. If we can do as much work as possible on the Google Doc and then transfer that over to Word for Pam, then that might be useful. That way Pam is essentially the last set of eyes in and is offering her thoughts on what we came up with as a body. Okay. So let's have like an earlier deadline for the Google Doc and then kick it over to Pam, and then Pam will get a chance to weigh in, and then we can bring it back to the full body, you know, and kind of go back and forth like that. Does that make sense?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Okay. All right. All right. I know that we're almost there because I want to be mindful of the task force members and their other commitments. But again, I guess at this point we would still have quorum if someone had to drop off. Christine? Okay. All right, so then we're pretty in good shape. All right, so where we are, Pam, just to get you caught up, is that we're uh Anne came up with some lovely questions for us to consider. Nikki brought up a great point about aligning those questions with our existing rubric, and as you kind of heard her break down a way to reformat the rubric itself so that it has the questions and the alignment with the areas that we're particularly interested in. Because you raised the point about preparing and being ready with questions, do you have some thoughts that you'd like to offer now regarding the Q&A portion of, well, the interview portion rather, for the application process for the poet laureate? I know it's tricky. It's always tricky. You can't come off mute, Pam? Okay. It's like that. It's okay. So again, we will communicate via email to be able to get a lot of these things done. And hopefully that's fine for you all. But and I'm gonna trust that, you know, with Nikki's mind, that we're gonna make sure that we're all in alignment prior to Monday. So I think we're in pretty good shape. I think as Ann mentioned, we have all pretty much been on the same page when it comes to this process. I'm really excited to be nearing the end with all of you. Any final thoughts or any additional thoughts?
It
No,
Not
looks
I
to.
like
figured out how to turn my mic on.
there
Can you
she
guys
is.
hear me?
Oh, Pam. Okay, go ahead, Pam. Go ahead. Finish. Go ahead.
All right. So yeah.
Oh, really
Yeah,
quick.
I just had
Really
two
quick,
thoughts. Are we gonna
before you
have
get
like
before you get started, Pam. Ann, do you have to exit?
I do have to exit, so I will send, I'm sorry, Pam.
no
I
worries?
will send in a I will send my potential questions, should I send it to everybody or to just Christine and MK? It doesn't matter to me.
Let's start with everybody. Christine will do the work of organizing us as a group, and we'll just go from there. Thank you so much,
Great.
Ann.
Sure. Thank you. Take care.
No problem. Okay. Okay, I'm sorry about that, Pam. Please
No,
continue.
no worries. Yeah. So one thing I was thinking is like, are we gonna have something organized where it's like, okay, so Nikki will start us off with this question and we'll ask this question. Like, are we gonna have like it kind of set like that so that it's pretty organized? And then my second question is, I would be inclined to go back to the resumes and the applications and want to ask some specific questions to each. So are we going to have like some questions that are for all the candidates and then some questions that are specific to the three that we are doing three, right? Correct. even
Yes.
though, yeah, we
Yes.
did, yeah. So each of the three candidates about, like, for example, some of the ideas they had for the position.
Absolutely. So one of the things that you'll see when Ann sends the questions are very pretty general questions that kind of pull out different parts of their resumes and their experiences. So you'll see some of those questions that kind of get at that just in a really general way. But then too, in terms of like the order of who will ask the questions, I'll start us as the chair, but after that, we can figure out an order that makes sense, and it will be great. And this is something that Connor just kind of laid out just a moment ago when he said that, as somebody who is a published poet, but given that he also has this role with the mayor's office, that he's thinking much more about the civic responsibility that goes with the poet laureate, for him to be able to offer a question that goes into that space. Does that make sense? So that way, these questions somewhat align with our roles, like how we entered into this body to begin with in the task force, and just kind of go from there. So no, I think we can figure that out via email.
Sure.
That we can land on it and we'll be in good shape. But yeah, we're very much on the same page with your comments, Pam.
Great. Thank you.
Oh, sure. Any other thoughts regarding how we move this thing forward? So again, we're going to do a lot of our work via email. But if there's any other thoughts that we want to offer in this space, now will be the time to do it. Well, I think we've reached the end. I'm super excited. We're there. We are right there. Except for whatever might happen next week. Because we can't, it is what it's going to be, but I'm excited about it. That means that we'll be able to offer a new recommendation for the poet laureate after we conclude. Speaking of which, in terms of meetings, Christine, do we have a meeting scheduled after our interviews? How do you see that breaking down logistically?
We don't have anything on the calendar, but we do have the interviews are on the 31st.
Mhm.
It might be helpful. Again, you can do some of this via email
Mhm.
to meet. I mean, you could meet that week or definitely no later than the 7th of April to make final decisions, because the next week is, if we're able to get this individual at the swearing in ceremony, that would be on the 15th.
What we could do is we could start by trying it via email, and if a member of the body requests a meeting so that we can hash out our differences verbally, then we can figure it out at that time. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
It does, and I think I'll just sort of, if it makes sense, add a meeting to the calendar for 4 o'clock on April 7th.
Yep.
I know it's a tricky day for some folks, but just in case we need to touch base, and I can cancel it if not, but that way it's already on there and we don't lose sight of it.
Great. Let's do that. That's great. That's great. And that's what you were referring to, Pam, in terms of making sure that we have a kind of a backstop conversation queued up just in case. Perfect. All right. So again, we'll try it in all the ways, but then be prepared to offer our final thoughts in public on April 7th regarding the recommendation for who would be the next poet laureate. All right.
I have a quick question.
Sure.
We're doing these interviews on Zoom, is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, just wanted to make sure, but they're public as well?
Yes.
Meaning like public as in live, or public like they're taped and people?
Oh, I think live, right, Christine? Yeah, they're live.
Okay. Can people then comment and stuff, or?
It's a good question.
We haven't been accepting testimony from the public, but that doesn't mean you couldn't make a different decision. I think as it's happening, it might be tricky, especially because we have such limited time, but we could let folks know. Yeah, I don't know. That people are like, we haven't really discussed the names of everyone who's being interviewed yet. But yeah, I guess there's no obligation under the ordinance to accept public testimony, and we are kind of in a bit of a time crunch. And I think we've made this a really much more transparent process than it's been in the past. So
yeah, so people might comment, but I think I will advise us to stay on task and to ask the questions that you want answered, as opposed to opening space for whoever might chime in the comment section, honestly, in the chat. And I mean, those things could be looked at later. Certainly, Christine can moderate that to a degree. But whatever we allow for one, we would have to allow for them all. And there's no real way of doing that because it's not really that kind of a process. But anyways, I'm again, but this will be transparent. This will be live. It's such a refreshing thing. I keep thinking about Gil Scott Heron when he had the poem, the revolution will not be televised. It is so funny because what he meant was that there will be no tape delay. That's all he meant. There will be no tape like this that is live. That's all he means. He says it at the very end, right? And so this is live. This is going to be a live hashing out of where the city is going to go in terms of the poet laureate. And I'm really excited to be a part of that process. Any other thoughts?
I would just add that I'm pretty sure that if we set up a meeting that doesn't include public testimony, that there's not a way for people to participate via the chat. And I know we don't have to follow the rules that the Board of Aldermen follows, but typically, if people are chiming in, that's like not the way that we interact with people. You have to sign up to testify, or you have to submit written testimony.
Perfect. Perfect. Well, let's do that part. Let's just make it live for people to watch, but not necessarily enable them to offer chat comments. All right. All right. Any other thoughts or questions? I feel like we're at the end. So I think we know what we're going to do. We're going to hash out the order and the questions, aligning it with the rubric via email. We will then we will start with a Google Doc and then make sure that all of those things are transferred over to a Word doc so that Pam can participate and weigh in heavily. And then once we're all of one mind without any sort of changes, then that will be the document that both Pam will have in terms of the Word document and the Google document that we'll have. That way we're on the same page, no discrepancies. And then we'll have our interview next Monday. It'll go pretty quickly, back to back to back. So whatever you need to have your stamina up, be prepared for that. And then we'll go from there. Then we'll have an opportunity to kind of weigh in on the process via email, and then we'll have our meeting potentially for the 7th, if we needed to kind of hash it out again virtually as to who the next poet laureate recommendation will be. And then we'll go from there. I think that's the cadence of things. Yeah. All right. Well, then that's it. Then can I get an order? Not order. Can I get a motion to adjourn?
Move to adjourn.
Can I get
second.
Okay, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. All right. Well, thank you. We will connect again next week, or really via email this week. Thank you.
Thank you.